Well, hey, great to have you with us today. We're launching a brand new series simply called Simple. And really it was sparked by a conversation that I was kind of sitting in on with some of our people just last week, where they were sharing their experiences of the people in their sphere's response when they talked about Jesus. And it was almost to a person that they had the response from their sphere when they talked about Jesus of the conversation quickly got derailed to things like bad church experiences and maybe misconceptions about who Jesus really is and how he kind of operates. And so over these next 3 weeks with this series Simple, I just want to strip everything back to the studs and hopefully clarify some of the complication and misconceptions. One being that some people think that only good people can run to God, and that bad people should run away from God. And then the thought follows on that if you're a bad person, but somehow you want to run to God, that you better get good first. You better fix everything first. And yet, when I read the biographies of Jesus, one of the things that's very, very clear is that people who weren't like Jesus liked Jesus. And Jesus liked people who weren't like him. And it's very important to understand that Jesus came to offer a very different and a new and a better paradigm about how we can actually have a personal connection to God. And when he came to introduce that, it was very, very radical and very, very different from the experience of the Jewish people that he found himself dropped into. Because their relationship with God was very much framed within a system, and that they had to operate within that system. And one of the expectations of that system is that they were expected to live holier than they ever could in order to get on God's good side. You know, living with the assumption that, yeah, I know God loves me, but I don't think he actually likes me. And they could never get out from under that with the system that existed. And so Jesus came to introduce a new paradigm. And he kicked off this paradigm with a very simple invitation. And he gave that invitation to people 2,000 years ago, and he's been extending that exact same invitation ever since, including today, and including you and me in this invitation. So what I want you to do, if you've got your Bible or your Bible app, how about you open that up to Matthew chapter 9. So Matthew is one of Jesus' biographers. And in fact, the last series we just finished, The Joy Factor, we took what's known as chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, and then last week, chapter 8, and looked at some of the highlight reel of Jesus' teaching and Jesus' actions. Now I'm going to take us to the very next chapter, but strongly encourage you, if you haven't already, to go back to Matthew chapter 5 and read 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then we're going to drop into chapter 9 today. And the context that I'm going to drop us into was Jesus' interaction with a tax collector, a Jewish tax collector. Now, a Jewish tax collector was actually contracted by Rome to collect taxes on behalf of Rome, because Rome largely funded the expansion of its empire through taxes. Let me bring you up to speed with some of the things that they taxed. They imposed an income tax, a land tax, tax on wine, on fruit, on grain. There were tolls on bridges and roads and gates. There were direct import taxes, export taxes, harbor taxes, town taxes. And the Roman Empire essentially sold the rights to people to be able to collect those taxes, like a franchise kind of thing. And so in the Jewish community, there was Jewish people who bought those rights, bought the license to collect taxes on behalf of Rome. And what they would do, when they were actually allowed to do it, is they would be able to impose an additional fee, which was kind of like their commission for collecting their taxes. But it didn't stop there. They were also able to subcontract other people to collect taxes under their license. And each of those subcontractors was able to add their own commission as well. And so this just got layered and layered and layered. And in fact, in the day, they were known as, or referred to as, licensed robbers. And because they were effectively not only collecting money from their own people for the Romans, they were also ripping their own people off in addition to line their own pockets. And so they became the most despised group of people in the entire Jewish world. It's so much so that Jesus' biographers, when they talked about baddies, gave tax collectors their own category. They used the expression sinners and tax collectors. Sinners included like prostitutes and serial killers, and then tax collectors had their own category and were considered far worse. That's what I'm dropping us into today. And so Jesus, he'd just been healing people, and then Matthew picks up the next thing. As Jesus went from there, he saw a man named Matthew, which, by the way, is the guy writing this, sitting at the tax collector's booth. He was a tax collector. Jesus simply said to him, "Follow me." Jesus approached the worst of the worst, got up close, got intimate, and gave him a very personal invitation. And so if you're someone who's bought into the notion that the bad things you've done disqualifies you from ever having a relationship with God, I hope this very, very moment in history is good news for you. If you've brought into the notion that the only way to get close to God is to follow a long list of do's and don'ts and follow them perfectly, and if you don't, you can't get close to God. Well, I hope right now that this very moment in history where Jesus approached the worst of the worst, got personal with him and invited him to follow him, is good news for you. But just as telling to understand what Jesus didn't say to Matthew. Jesus didn't say, "You're a disgrace to your people, disgrace to your family, you're a disgrace." Jesus didn't give him a list of things he had to stop. Come follow me, but if you are going to follow me, you need to stop doing these things. He didn't give him a list of things he needed to start. Matthew, if you're going to follow me, you need to start doing these things. He could have, buried Matthew in guilt right then and there, and it would have all been true. But Jesus didn't do that. He simply said, "Follow me." So it's critical to understand that being a sinner doesn't disqualify you from a relationship with Jesus. It's actually a prerequisite. And he extends the same invitation to every single one of us every single day. Whether you've been a follower of Jesus for 20 years or 20 minutes, it's not a one-time invitation. It's an everyday invitation. Whether you've never made the decision to follow Jesus, and I'm going to talk about that next week, but he extends that invitation to you right here and now. Even if you haven't fully got to the place where you believe that he's the Son of God, you can actually start following him. Just like the invitation he gave to Matthew. And Matthew got up and followed him. Matthew got up and just brought all of his history with him, brought all of his baggage with him, brought all of his poor reputation with him. Everything in his past was less than God's best, and he got up and just like, here, I'm going to follow you, Jesus. And that one decision, that very response, and the baby steps that Matthew continued to take throughout his life absolutely brought about a change that he could never have imagined and never have created on his own. So if you've got stuff in your past or stuff going on right now that's less than God's best, bring it with you. Jesus can deal with it. And over time, he'll bring about the sort of change and transformation that is beyond your wildest dreams. The very next slice further highlighted this new paradigm. So Matthew threw a feast in Jesus' honor at Matthew's house. So while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Now, remember, this account has actually been written by Matthew, and he's just calling it like it is. He's saying that the people that came to my house that I wanted to introduce to Jesus, we were all tax collectors and sinners. These are my colleagues, and these were my friends, my sinful friends. but this just makes perfect sense. That the main people that God has set us up to introduce to Jesus is our sphere, our current sphere of influence. Friends, family, colleagues, fellow students. This was Matthew's sphere. By the way, they would have been the only people that would have said yes to an invitation to Matthew's house because nobody else would have wanted to associate him, especially religious people. See, on the one hand, tax collectors were so despised, they were actually banned from the temple. And in effect, by banning them from going into the temple, they were essentially, in that religious system of the day, banned from having a relationship with God. They couldn't approach God. And coupled with that, religious people wouldn't associate with them in any setting because they thought they would catch the schmutz, that the clean people, the religious people, they were afraid they would become unclean by getting in close proximity with a tax collector. And yet here we are, a rabbi, Jesus, sitting inside Matthew's home with more tax collectors and many sinners. And I just love that after Jesus invited Matthew to follow him, he didn't take him to the temple to get things sorted out. He didn't sit him down and preach a 30-minute sermon on all of the things that Matthew fell short of. He went home with Matthew before he made any changes. Because Jesus understood, and Jesus understands, that change begins in his presence. Change begins with his being with us. And in fact, the invitation comes before the relationship. Matthew had no relationship with Jesus. And Jesus invited him to come follow him, and then ultimately invited him into a relationship. And then our change comes as a response to that. It comes as the ongoing process empowered by Jesus' love and grace, which I talked about last week. And this might seem weird to you if this isn't your experience or your understanding of church. Some of you, may have been told that you had to get things right before you could approach Jesus. That Jesus' message to you is, look, go fix yourself and then give me a call. But we're reading Matthew's account, and this is the real Jesus, the real version. Hardcore sinners, career sinners, tax collectors, evidently felt comfortable around Jesus, and Jesus evidently felt comfortable around them. And this absolutely ought to be true of the church today. And if we ever get to the place as a church where sinners don't feel comfortable, don't feel they can get near us, then we need to take a good look in the mirror. Well, when the Pharisees saw this, they asked Jesus' disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Now, the tax collectors, they wouldn't have gone in the home. They would have, because they wouldn't have associated with Matthew. They wouldn't have gone near Matthew and his friends. So they're seemingly maybe looking through the window. And look, I don't know. We don't know how they got the word to the disciples, send a paper plane in, or maybe the disciples were, sort of near the window and the Pharisees spoke to them through we don't know. But somehow these Pharisees who wouldn't go inside the house, they'd seen inside Matthew's house. And they'd seen Jesus, this rabbi, this teacher, whose reputation as a teacher and a healer was growing. They saw Jesus sitting at the table with tax collectors and sinners, and they were confused because this isn't how their system was set up to operate. Well, Jesus got the message, and his response was to the Pharisees, the religious leaders. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. See, Jesus didn't pretend there weren't any issues with the people he was sitting around the table with. He effectively called them sick. And Matthew, who wrote this account down, was included in that category. And Matthew didn't dispute it either. He's like, Jesus calling us sick? Yeah, I guess we are. Okay, that's us. We need a doctor. No denial from Jesus, no denial from Matthew and his cohort. But again, the starting point for Jesus wasn't fixing all of the stuff. The starting point was the invitation to follow him, which was in absolute 180 degrees contrast with the religious system that the Pharisees operated in and that people were expected to operate in. That you had to fix the stuff before you could associate publicly. And then Jesus kind of served it up to the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees, understand, they were considered the experts. They were used to being the smartest people in the room. They were used to being the authority. They were used to being the ones that others would ask questions of, wanting insight into God and who he is and how he operates. And Jesus looked them in the eye and said to them, "But go and learn what this means." Meaning, you think you know everything, but I'm going to expose the fact that you don't know everything. So go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, like you, Pharisees, or you think you're righteous, but the sinners. the people like the people around this table. See, it's in a marriage, you can go through all the motions. You know, the stuff you learn at the pre-marriage course and the stuff you learn from the book. You know, you can, guys, you can put the toilet seat down. You can both squeeze the toothpaste tube from the bottom, which is the right way to do it. You can make sure you feed the toilet roll over the top, which is also the right way to do it. Fringe, not mullet. You can do all that. You can go through all the motions. But if there is no relationship of love and joy in your marriage, then you're just housemates. And Jesus is more interested in the relationship than the routine. Yeah, routines matter, but they're not the end in and of themselves. They're the things that help grease the wheels of the relationship. They actually lead us places. They actually remove obstacles and blockages. And Jesus was confronting the religious leaders with the reality that they had made the routines an end in and of themselves. And they'd forgotten that the routines were only ever designed to lead people into a relationship with God. Now, here's a bonus thought, by the way, and this is especially important for church veterans, but it's important for all of us. It's this idea that if we're intently following Jesus, that requires us to intently look at him, focus on him, and listen to him, and not get distracted. And if we're doing that, then by definition, we won't have time to judge where other people are at. You know, we're so consumed by where Jesus is leading us and grateful for the work that he's already done in us, and that he continues to remind us that there's still so much great transformation ahead, that we're not so focused on the work that God hasn't done in other people yet, which is what we judge other people for. And this is better. Our invitation is following Jesus, not evaluating others. There's a bonus thought. Now, in video games, some of you are potentially gamers, you already know this. There's a mode called God mode, and developers hate this because and they try to kind of shut that possibility down for people playing the game, that they could find God mode. Because what God mode is it's a cheat mode where the characters or the players have access to extra powers that they weren't meant to have, extra ammunition that they weren't meant to have access to. And it allows players to effectively become almost invincible within the game. Jesus calls us not into God mode, Jesus calls us into follower mode. And it won't make us invincible, at least not while we're on this earth, but it will give us access to extra powers, extra ammunition, and it will give us access to perspectives that we wouldn't arrive at on our own. And Jesus calls us to live constantly in follower mode. Not a one-time invitation, not just a one-off event. Every single day, live in follower mode. And he will lead you to better. You know, I've never, ever, in my 3 decades as a Jesus follower, I've never met anybody who's been following Jesus intently for a lengthy period of time. I've never met anybody who's ever told me that they regret that. Regret living in follower mode. So I want to encourage you to accept that invitation. If you've never accepted that invitation before from Jesus to follow him, make that your decision today. Just like Matthew did, get up and follow Jesus. If you've made that decision before, then guess what? The invitation loops back today. Follow Jesus today. Follow Jesus tomorrow. Follow Jesus next week, next month, next year, next decade, and he will continue